Hello, everyone, and welcome to our virtual Lunch and Learn featuring alumna and Sister of Charity of Seton Hill, Sister Mary Ann Corr. My name is Callie, and I have the privilege of serving as Seton Hill's Assistant Director of Alumni Relations. On behalf of Seton Hill and the Office of Alumni Relations, thank you for joining our Lunch and Learn as part of the Alumni College. The Alumni College advances the university's mission by providing graduates with stimulating programs that support their journey of thinking and acting critically, creatively, and ethically as productive members of society committed to transforming the world. We're excited to have launched the Alumni College this past February because it has given us the opportunity to bring together lifelong learning opportunities already available to alumni in a comprehensive format, including our Lunch and Learn program. The Lunch and Learn features subject matter experts offering a bite-sized presentation and Q&A on a variety of topics. This afternoon, we are very excited to be joined by Sister Mary Ann Corr, who will be offering her talk, Elizabeth Seton, wife, mother, community founder, saint, in honor of Saint Elizabeth Ann Seton's 248th birth anniversary. Before I introduce our guest speaker, I want to share just a few housekeeping items. Please be mindful that your mics were muted upon entry for better sound quality. There will be some opportunity for conversation at the end of the presentation, so you can control your mic by hovering over the bottom left corner of your screen and clicking on the mic button to mute and unmute yourself. For better sound quality, we do ask that you please keep yourself muted when you are not speaking. Should you have any questions during the presentation, please enter them in the chat function and they will be received by the event host and co-hosts. We will do our best to cover as many questions as we can during the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. Lastly, please be mindful that this session is being recorded. So to be mindful of everyone's time, we do hope to do our best to keep this program to about an hour. So at this time, I would like to introduce our featured speaker for this afternoon. Sister Mary Ann Corr graduated from Seton Hill in 1967 with a bachelor's degree in studio arts. She earned a master's degree in reading from the University of Arizona, as well as a master's degree in religious study from Fordham University. She then earned a doctoral degree from the University of Pittsburgh. She entered the congregation of the Sisters of Charity of Seton Hill in September of 1955. Sister Mary Ann's service included 24 years as an educator in Catholic elementary and secondary schools and as an adjunct professor at the Franciscan University of Steubenville. She then moved into ministry with 6 years as an elementary education consultant, 11 years as a superintendent, 10 years as a director of Christian formation, and 2.5 years as a director of the Institute for Ministry. She taught in dioceses of Altoona, Johnstown, Pittsburgh, Tucson, and Phoenix, and worked in ministries for over 30 years. She then moved into a parish role as a pastoral associate and currently serves as a spiritual director, leading a group of people in the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius Loyola. Today, we are very honored to have Sister Mary Ann Corr lead us in a presentation of St. Elizabeth Ann Seton in celebration of her 248th birth anniversary. We extend a very special thank you to Sister Mary Ann Corr for sharing her time and expertise with us today. So at this time, please join me in giving her a very warm welcome. Sister Mary Ann.
Thank you. And hello. Elizabeth Seton was all of these people. She was a wife, a mother, a community founder, and a saint. But she was born in 1774. What does the life of Elizabeth Seton have for us today in 2022? We will have much to learn from Elizabeth, who struggled to develop her relationship with God, her Heavenly Father, just as we today work to develop and strengthen our relationship with God, our Father, Jesus, our Savior, and the Holy Spirit, our Comforter. For Elizabeth, to live was to follow the plan God had for her, to be open to the many twists and turns in her life, and to grow in her love of God through experience at each period of her life. Elizabeth is the first American-born saint. When she was born on August 28, 1774, only 6 days later, the First Continental Congress with leaders from the 13 American colonies gathered in Philadelphia, united in their desire for independence. These actions preceded the Revolutionary War and the birth of the United States of America. Elizabeth's father, Richard Bailey, was a physician and the first health officer in New York City. Her mother was Catherine Carleton, the daughter of an Episcopalian minister who was revered by the people of his congregation and a friend to poor Negroes. Elizabeth was the second child. Her older sister was named Mary Magdalene. Elizabeth, through both her father and her mother's lineage, was related to many of the first families of New York. Elizabeth's father became engaged in the war and was a hospital surgeon. When learning that his wife was again pregnant and not well, Richard resigned his commission to rush home to his wife. Richard arrived home in time for the birth of his third daughter, but also for the death of his wife. Catherine was born on May 8, 1777, when Elizabeth was only 3 years old. With the death of her mother, a sad period of time began with Elizabeth, who, along with her sister Mary, who was 7, and her baby sister Catherine, who for a year was cared for by a governess, and after that time by her father's second wife, Charlotte Barclay. While her new stepmother took care of Elizabeth and her sisters, the affection which might have been extended to 3 motherless children was absent. Her younger sister, Catherine, or Kitty, died when she was 2 years old, and Elizabeth wished that she too might go up to heaven with Kitty and Mama. When Charlotte began to have her own children, she bore Richard Bailey 7 children. She had a natural preference for them. Mary and Elizabeth seemed less and less to be included in the family's activities. Dr. Bailey often sent his 2 girls, Mary and Elizabeth, to spend long periods of time with his brother in New Rochelle, which only strengthened the sense that they were not members of his family. However, Dr. Bailey did make sure that his 2 daughters from his first wife were educated at a private school where they were involved in studies proper to young ladies, which included French and music. Thus, throughout her teen years, Elizabeth was often lonely, and she instinctively drew closer to God, who was unchanging. Elizabeth continued to develop her religious tendencies, living in the family of her father's brother, and she enjoyed life with her cousins, who were a happy family. Her sister Mary married a young physician, Dr. Wright Post, in the spring of 1790 in New York. About the same time, Elizabeth also returned to New York, and as she could no longer live with her father's family, spent the next 4 years living with her sister Mary or with relatives of her deceased mother. While her living situation was difficult at times, she finally strengthened her loving relationship with her father. They had always had similar personalities, and they were both able to really grow in their love relationship as father and daughter. Elizabeth understood that it was her father's dedication to medicine that had taken much of his time during her early years, and she was understanding of his time away from her. Elizabeth also developed relations with other women who were later in life to become her dearest friends. It was also during these later teenage years that she met and began to fall in love with William Seton. Elizabeth met William McGee Seton In the winter of 1790 to 1791, when she was 16 and William was 22 years of age. Spending time at her sister Mary's house and enjoying being with other young women, she soon became very popular in New York society. She frequently crossed paths with and was attracted to William. William had spent several years in Italy and developed a love for the opera and the arts. William courted Elizabeth, but more slowly. However, they both enjoyed dance and the theater, and they soon became a handsome couple, attending the balls and social activities of New York society. On January 25th, 1794, Elizabeth and William were married, and their marriage was officiated by Reverend Samuel Provost, who was the rectory of Trinity Church, an Episcopal church. The young couple were very happy, as can be seen in the letters which they wrote to one another when William was away on business. For the beginning of their marriage, they lived with William's father and family, but within a year, they moved to 27 Wall Street in the central area of New York. Elizabeth and William were joyful when they knew they would have their first child. Anna Marie Seton was born on May 3rd, 1795, and Elizabeth and William settled down to a happy life. Elizabeth and William had another child, a son, whom they named after his father, William, while they lived at their home on Wall Street. However, some sad days were ahead for both William and Elizabeth. First, William's father died June 9th, 1798, and Elizabeth and William found it necessary to move back to the elder Seton's home on Stone Street, where William and Elizabeth had lived at the beginning of their marriage. The Seton house had included 7 motherless children, and now, with William's father gone, Elizabeth and William began to care for these orphaned 7 children, as well as their own 2 children. During these days, Elizabeth, who was now 24 years old, grew very close to her sister-in-law, Rebecca, who was now 18 years old. This was helpful to Elizabeth, who would soon have another child and had experienced illness in this pregnancy. 2 of the younger boys, Edward and Samuel, were sent to private school. Charlotte, Mary, Harriet, and Cecilia Seton were also younger sisters-in-law, and they all began to live together in the stone house, and also sometimes in their family's country estate, which would become 80th Street in New York City. Even though she was not always well, Elizabeth became her husband's secretary as he tried to keep his father's shipping business solvent. When the baby was born in July of 1798, both Elizabeth and the baby were ill, and the baby almost died. Dr. Bailey worked tirelessly with the baby. When he was christened the following month, Elizabeth's 3rd child was named Richard after her father. The yellow fever was raging in New York, and many persons, including most of Elizabeth's children, suffered from it. Her father worked tirelessly fighting the fever and spent all of his time in the hospital with the sick. The following year in June, Elizabeth's 2nd daughter, Catherine, was born. After this birth, Elizabeth seems to gain even more strength. This was good because the children took turns experiencing bouts of yellow fever. After many months of unending working with those who were sick with yellow fever, Dr. Bailey himself became ill. He finally succumbed to this illness on August 17, 1801. While Elizabeth experienced much sadness at the death of her father, she found it necessary to continue to try to support her husband, Will, as he tried to save his father's business and to support his large family of his wife, Elizabeth, their 4 children, and his 7 brothers and sisters. In spite of his many efforts, Will sees the firm fail, and he is forced to file a petition of bankruptcy. Elizabeth continues to support her husband and care for the family, so dependent on her support. On August 20th, 1802, the last child of Elizabeth and Will was born and named Rebecca. Elizabeth watched as her husband's health began to fail. She had always been concerned because while he was a good husband and father, he had not had any concern about religion. Will's health was declining, but he finally began to listen to Elizabeth's pleas to give more attention to his need for God to help him. Elizabeth was so grateful that she was supportive when William wanted to make a trip to Italy, where he believed he would regain his health. Elizabeth happily supported him. Will had developed tuberculosis and was so ill that Elizabeth did not believe that he would survive, yet she believes in the healing power of God. They began to make plans for the trip. They planned to leave 4 of their children with relatives, but planned to take their oldest daughter, Anna, who is now 8 years old, with them. While it is difficult to leave their children, Elizabeth supports Will as they travel to Italy to visit his friends, the Felicis. The 3 of them, Elizabeth, William, and Anna, traveled nearly 7 weeks by ship, the Shepherdess, to Leghorn. Will seemed to improve during the trip, and they looked forward to his visit with their friends. When they arrived in Italy, but before they can leave the ship, they learn that since this is the first ship to arrive since the yellow fever has been in New York, and since the officials believe that Will may have yellow fever, he is not allowed to land and must go to a place of waiting until it is clear he does not have yellow fever. He and Elizabeth and Anna travel a short distance to a place called the Lazaretto. This Lazaretto consisted of small buildings with cement floors, which were cold and damp. This condition was harmful to William. Finally, after a period of several weeks, the time at the Lazaretto was over, and Elizabeth, William, and Anna traveled to a lovely hotel, arrangements which had been made by his friends, the Felicis. William loved the lodgings which his friend, the Felicis, had engaged for them. He enjoyed talking about his family and the joys of eternity. He was often praying as he became increasingly weaker. After much suffering, William died on December 27, 1803, and was buried a few days later in an English cemetery with an Episcopalian burial service. After William's death, Elizabeth with Anna was welcomed into the home of Antonio Felici and his wife Amabilia. Antonio and his brother Filippo, who was 1 year older, were very friendly to Elizabeth, and they made it clear that her husband Will had been an early friend of their youth. Both brothers were also impressed with the qualities of her heart and soul that they found in Elizabeth as she bore pain and suffering with the death of her husband. Being anxious for Elizabeth and Anna to be peaceful in their time of sorrow, Amabilia accompanied Elizabeth and Anna on a visit to Florence. Elizabeth visited her first Catholic church during this visit and said that she liked the experience. Elizabeth was touched when Amabilia told her that Jesus Christ was really present on the altar during the Mass. Elizabeth and Anna hoped to travel home in February, but first Anna and then Elizabeth both were struck with scarlet fever. So this schedule had to be revised. This change in schedule gave Elizabeth more time to learn about the Catholic Church. She was especially moved by the real presence and the universal motherhood of Mary. Finally, on April 8th, 1804, Elizabeth and Anna sailed home to New York after Elizabeth had visited Will's grave for the last time. When Elizabeth and Anna returned, they were met by her family and friends on June 4th, 1804. Elizabeth was so happy to see her youngest child, Rebecca, as she was feared that she would not live, as she had been so frail when Elizabeth began her travel. Elizabeth did experience more sadness as her sister-in-law and dear friend, Rebecca Seton, had been dying for several weeks. Rebecca Seton only lived for a few days, but Elizabeth tried to share her new knowledge about the Catholic truths. Rebecca quietly gasped the words of Naomi, "Your people are my people, your God, my God." Then she went home to God. The month of June was difficult for Elizabeth as she had to find housing and care for her 5 children. They had earlier difficulties, but William had always been there for support, and now she welcomed help. For a while, she lived with her sister Mary and received financial support from a friend of William's and her godmother. When Elizabeth announced that she was thinking of becoming a Catholic, her friends tried to dissuade her. Many of her friends felt that she would soon change her mind and that she was still mourning her husband. With the money she had received, she found a small house where she and her children lived on the top floor and planned to rent out the first floor. She tried 2 ventures, opening a school and running a boarding house. Neither of these were successful, as people feared her Catholic leanings. Reverend John Henry Hobart, who had been her Episcopalian minister and friend, first tried to gently refute her desire to become a Catholic. When that did not work, he asked her to read a book promoting Episcopalian beliefs. This really helped her make up her mind to move toward the Catholic beliefs, which she had learned when she was in Italy. Her friend Antonio also gave Elizabeth books to read, which contradicted the book of Episcopalian beliefs. Filippo had also given Elizabeth a letter for Bishop John Carroll, who was the Bishop of Baltimore, and Antonio encouraged her to contact Bishop Carroll. Over the next months, Elizabeth suffered greatly, trying to make the choice to join the Catholic Church while being discouraged by Reverend Hobart. Antonio finally wrote to Bishop Carroll asking him to help Elizabeth and her 5 children become Catholic. After many months of struggle and the assistance of a priest who was a friend of Antonio's, Elizabeth was finally able to make the choice of the Catholic Church for herself and her children. On March 14, 1805, Elizabeth and her children joined the Catholic Church, and on March 20th, received confession for the first time. This decision resulted in distinct changes in the relations of her friends and some family members. They no longer gave her the trust which she had once enjoyed, and her social standing had dropped considerably. Elizabeth considered placing her children in a religious boarding school so that they could be educated, and she would offer her services as a teacher to help pay for their education. About this time, Father William de Bourgh, who was president of St. Mary College in Baltimore, suggested that she should open a school in Baltimore. Bishop John Carroll advised her to accept this suggestion. Another priest stated that she was destined for some great good in the United States. Elizabeth accepted Father de Bourgh's proposal, and she and her children took up residence in Baltimore on June 15, 1808, at a newly built house on Paca Street. Previous to this time, her 2 boys, William and Richard, were already students at Georgetown, education provided by her friend Antonio Felici. It was at this site on Paca Street that Elizabeth Seton founded her first Catholic school. Though the school was small at the beginning, with 4 boarders and Elizabeth's 3 daughters, religion was stressed and teaching was enhanced by access to master teachers from St. Mary College, situated in the building next to the Paca Street building. Elizabeth, as headmaster, determined the cost of attending the school and the daily schedule with a curriculum of reading, writing, English, French, and needlework. The enrollment grew to 10 by December, and the school population began to grow slowly. When Elizabeth met with Bishop Carroll in November, she shared that for some period of time, she felt called to religious life. From the beginning of the Paca school, there was always the thought that the foundation for a religious community could also be built along with the school. Elizabeth had shared in a letter to Antonio that she had hopes that other women would want to join her and that she would form a permanent institution. The school on Paca Street had opened in June of 1808, and by December 1808, the first young woman, Cecilia O'Conway from Philadelphia, joined Elizabeth. She was determined to give her life to God. Several months later, Maria Murphy, also of Philadelphia, came to join them. Soon, 2 other women, Susan Clossy from New York and Mary Ann Butler from Philadelphia, joined Elizabeth and Cecilia and Maria. They were assisting in the school as more young girls came to the school for their religious instruction. But these women waited for a movement toward religious life, which they desired. In the presence of Archbishop Carroll, Elizabeth Seton pronounced vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience on March 25th, 1809 for 1 year. She was called Mother Seton from that time. Elizabeth had been wearing the garb used by widows in Italy since William had died in Italy. This garb included a black dress with a short black cape and a long black apron. On her head, she wore a black cap with a loose fluted attachment to the cap, which framed her face. It was attached with a bow under her chin. On June 2nd, 1809, the feast of Corpus Christi, the 4 women joined Mother Seton for the first time in public when they attended Mass and received Holy Communion in St. Mary Chapel. They dressed in a formal religious habit with a black cap, black dress, and black shawl. A rosary was draped from a leather belt. They soon became known as the American Sisters of Charity. Mother Seton, with the 4 new Sisters of Charity, had believed that the Felici brothers would provide the opportunity for the development of the community, the Sisters of Charity. But God's plan began to be made known. Mother Seton had been in regular communication with Father DeBourg, her spiritual director. Mother Seton had learned from Father DeBourg that he had for a long time desired to establish the Daughters of Charity in America. However, Father DeBourg did not have the financial resources to begin this new foundation. Mother Seton promised that she would join Father DeBourg in prayer for this new endeavor. At one conference, Mother Seton told Father DeBourg that she felt inspired to request funding from Samuel Cooper, a wealthy man who was known to both of them. But Father DeBourg cautioned Mother Seton to wait, explaining that if this inspiration came from God, then God would also inspire Mr. Cooper. Surprisingly, that evening, Samuel Cooper came to visit Father DeBourg, telling him of his desire to use his finances to promote morals and religion, and especially to favor women to promote this message. Father DeBourg then began to tell him of his desire in regard to an American religious community related to the Daughters of Charity, a French congregation begun by St. Vincent de Paul and St. Louise de Marillac. Mr. Cooper offered $10,000 to support such an endeavor. After ensuring that Mother Seton had not spoken to Mr. Cooper, Father DeBourg accepted his financial support. Understanding that Father DeBourg had planned to invite Mother Seton to begin this institution, Mr. Cooper said, "God be blessed." Several months later, Mr. Cooper communicated that this establishment would be made at Emmitsburg, a village some distance from Baltimore. He noted that from this establishment in Emmitsburg, Maryland, the religious community would extend across the United States. Mother Seton began her travel to Emmitsburg from Baltimore on June 21st, 1809. Her daughter, Anina, Anna Marie, and her sisters-in-law, Cecilia and Harriet, traveled with her. Cecilia had come to join the sisterhood, and Harriet had accompanied her to Baltimore for a visit. Sister Maria Murphy was also with them. They spent the month of July in a small cottage made available to them by Father John DeBourg, president of Mount St. Mary College. Mother Seton's daughters, Catherine and Rebecca, joined them a few days later. When their permanent home was ready, they moved to the Stone House, a farmhouse on the purchased property for the small community by Mr. Cooper. Then the other sisters came to live with them. Sisters Cecilia, Mary Ann, and Susan, and 4 new recruits, Sister Rose White, Catherine Mullen, Sally Thompson, and Ella Thompson. 2 pupils from the Paca Street School and Mother Seton's 2 sons, William and Richard, who are transferring to Mount St. Mary College, came to the Emmitsburg home as well. For a short time, Father DeBourg was the superior general in authority, but Mother Seton was always in regular communication with Archbishop Carroll. After Father DeBourg left, Father John Baptiste David was put in charge. However, he left very little to the discretion of Mother Seton and her council. His protege was Sister Rose White, and he tried to make her the Mother Superior rather than Mother Seton. He tried many schemes to achieve this, and the small community could have been ruined. But Mother Seton continued to report each crisis to Archbishop Carroll. The community was saved when Father David was sent to build the church in Kentucky. When Father David left, Father John Dubois was appointed to be the superior general. This was agreeable to Mother Seton. Death was very present to Mother Seton in these early days of the Sisters of Charity. Anina, her eldest daughter, had suffered from consumption similar to her father. Her health was declining, but she formally entered the Sisters of Charity and gained a deep holiness before she died on March 12, 1812. Mother Seton suffered deep grief at the death of her daughter and only went through the motions necessary in everyday life. The rule of the Sisters of Charity was formally ratified by Archbishop Carroll, Father Dubois, and all of the sisters on January 17, 1812. The rule was actually the rule of St. Vincent de Paul, which he had written for his Daughters of Charity, with some exceptions, allowing Mother Seton to care for her children and to include adaptations to the American way of life. This rule also included an emphasis on education. The school which Mother Seton began was both a boarding school and a day school, with students coming each day who were members of St. Joseph Parish. St. Joseph Academy was the first parish school from which the whole parochial school system grew throughout the country. Father Gabriel Brute came to assist Father Dubois at Mount St. Mary's, and he also became the spiritual director for Mother Seton. It was good to have his support and guidance in the next serious period of suffering. Her youngest daughter, Rebecca, an innocent, sweet girl, had fallen in 1812, and tuberculosis settled in her damaged hip. Finally, she suffered until 1816, when she died in her mother's arms. This became another period of intense suffering. Mother Seton saw both St. Joseph Academy and the Sisters of Charity grow in membership. She was able to see the Sisters of Charity open their first orphanage in Philadelphia in 1817, and a year later, the first free school, which was on the property of the orphanage. A second orphanage was opened in New York, and this was to lead to many expansions, which in the years ahead continued to grow to 6 religious congregations whose members serve the Catholic Church throughout the world. Mother Seton died in the care and love of her daughter Catherine on January 4th, 1821, when she was 46 years of age. Her final words to her sisters who prayed at her bedside was, "Be children of the church." These were her final words to her daughter, who lived out her words in various ministries throughout this world. Elizabeth Seton was beatified at St. Peter Basilica in Rome on March 17, 1963, by Pope John the 23rd. Blessed Elizabeth Seton was canonized on September 14, 1975, by Pope Paul VI. Saint Elizabeth Seton was the first American-born saint. Hundreds of thousands of young school children prayed for the canonization of Elizabeth Seton. Hundreds of thousands of her religious daughters, the Sisters and Daughters of Charity, rejoiced in 1975 and rejoice today in the guidance she gave and gives to all who follow her dedication to the Catholic Church and the many ministries within the church in which they are engaged on the road to eternity with the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Consider those aspects of the life of Elizabeth Seton in which you can take courage and from which you can gain strength to live in union with the Blessed Trinity. Elizabeth had a tremendous love of the Eucharist. Sisters of Charity have chosen to cherish and imitate this love of the Eucharist, the living body and blood of Jesus Christ. Elizabeth loved the Catholic Church. On her deathbed, she urged her daughters who were present and her daughters across the centuries and many miles to be children of the church. Some have adapted this challenge to read, "Be daughters of the church." These two gifts and qualities of Elizabeth endear her to me. Her acceptance of suffering and pain are an inspiration to me and to many others. I encourage you to look for opportunities to learn about Saint Elizabeth Ann Seton. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sister Mary Ann. That was very informative. And every time I hear a presentation about St. Elizabeth, I learned something new. So it was great to hear from you. And I hope everyone else enjoyed it as well. I do think we have time to open it up to some questions. If anyone has any questions for Sister Mary Ann about her presentation, feel free to either put your question in the chat or you're certainly welcome to unmute yourself at this time.
I have a question. I forget, where is she buried? Is she buried in New York? Mother Seton?
No, she's buried in Emmitsburg.
Is she buried in Emmitsburg? Okay. Is the family buried in New York, maybe? Some of the family, her parents?
That's very possible. I don't know that.
Oh. Okay.
Are there any other questions? And if not, that's fine too. Just want to make sure everyone gets a chance.
Did the sisters celebrate the birthday of Elizabeth Seton in a special way?
Well, it so happens that we happened to have an affair yesterday, and the sisters attended the affair. Casey Bowser, who's is an archivist both for us and for Seton Hill, gave a wonderful presentation, and we celebrated by attending. And then, of course, we were all together at Mass before that.
Thanks, sister.
Sister Marianne, someone in the chat had asked what happened to Elizabeth's sons. Do you happen to have any information on that?
I don't have direct information. I do know that one of the sons ended up in the Navy, and also one of the sons had a child who later became a bishop in the Catholic Church, and invited Sisters of Charity to come and to be present in his diocese. But I don't have any of the specifics on that.
Another really great resource too that we could post in the chat and is on our website to honor St. Elizabeth Ann Seton's birth anniversary is a link to the Seton Shrine website. And I know there's a lot of information about Elizabeth and her life and legacy on that website. So we can certainly put a link to that in the chat for you to check out as well following today's Lunch and Learn. But if there are no other questions, I want to just thank everyone again for joining us this afternoon. And a very special thank you again to Sister Mary Ann Corr for being with us today to share the inspiring legacy of St. Elizabeth Ann Seton. We hope you enjoyed this event and ask that you please be sure to visit our alumni website to learn more about upcoming Alumni College programs and other events. We are currently taking registration for our Fall Alumni Book Club, which is another program within the Alumni College. And we will be reading and discussing The Midnight Library by Matt Haig. So the